Oh, hi, I didn't see you there. My name is Bliss Foster. I am a full-time professional fashion critic, and this is part 2 of my coverage of Paris Fashion Week Spring-Summer 2023. If you didn't see part 1, you can watch it later. None of these have any direct connectivity to them. We just have a lot of great brands to cover here. I don't want to brag, but I feel like I probably went to more runway shows and presentations than any other journalist this year. There's about 100 brands that show during Paris Fashion Week, and we went to 44 of them. Again, I don't want to brag, it's not a contest, but if it was a contest, I feel like I would win. Okay, let's go to Rick Owens. I am extremely excited about this. Second Rick Owens show. This is the follow-up to the menswear show. He always titles them the same. Edfu is the name, which is a city in Egypt. Oftentimes, the women's wear collection are where he really shows off his skills, and I imagine this one will be no different. Rick has had some fascinating seasons with the Edfu collections. We've seen a more curated and focused offering from the brand. I've actually thought a lot about this one since I saw it, so we're going to set aside a whole episode for it. You can look for that in the coming weeks. Miu Miu was up next. This was my first show with them. Miu Miu is the sister brand of Prada, and it's not a diffusion line. Miu Miu is a separate luxury company. Where Prada tends to be more womanly and intellectual, Miu Miu is made more to embrace Miss Prada's girlier side. While each is important in contemporary fashion history and both have great output, I've always kind of had this soft spot for Miu Miu. Their clothes do always feel very girly, but it's never in a condescending way. It feels like a powerful, independent woman has had a personal breakthrough and is reveling in her new connectivity with her inner child. And much like with Prada, there's always this gorgeous presentation that comes with Miu Miu shows. The interior this season felt like the inside of a cavernous spaceship. But that childlike vision that I was referring to, that's what makes the current era of Miu Miu so interesting. Is the childlike voice of the brand seems to be wanting to grow up a little bit. We see blazers and leathers, but more telling is these layered thin jersey tees and haphazardly exposed boxers that kind of feel like a teenager who's beginning to find their personal style. Some of the details were brilliant, though, in how they relate to childhood. There was a few nylon outerwear pieces that were worn as if it was a jacket being put on backwards. And there were a few pieces that looked haphazardly added on as if someone was kind of playing dress up. And there's some motifs like this kind of distressed, maybe this interesting tanning technique that's being done to the leathers. I'm not sure exactly what's happening here, but this kind of leather is something that we've had for a few seasons in this new era of Miu Miu. They've done this for about 3 seasons now, and it's going to be really interesting to see how motifs like this get expanded out in the next year or 2 years. And for brands that have such a long history like Miu Miu, it's really great to see those core ideas still being changed up under the leadership of the person who founded it. Grandmama Miuccia she's still doing good stuff here. The next maison on the list was Rochas. The show notes say this season is like an ode to insouciance, which, if rephrased, means that this is a collection about being unbothered and thriving. The show seems to be set in a luxurious after-party type setting. The house is currently headed up by Charles de Vilmorin, who was appointed about a year and a half ago at just 24 years old. That is exceptionally young for a creative director appointment. So here, in this show, we're beginning to see the development of Charles's vision for the house. It usually takes a creative director of any age about 6 seasons to really get on the track that will define their career at that house. And during that time, they have to get used to leading a large team. They get close with their staff and kind of learn how everyone works individually. They study their own archives. But it's fascinating because during those 6 seasons, the starter seasons, it's so fun to watch because it's like there's this huge leap in the vision between every single show. Charles's goals here seem to be making the exuberant celebratory aesthetic that he's becoming known for more wearable, making ruffles more a regular part of our lives. He's also proposing original prints that are very reserved. Usually when labels propose a print, especially a label with such a young designer, we get a really daring, bold print, but Charles here presents us with a print that feels very drawn back and refined, more like something that we would see at Hermes. I'm excited to see where else Charles takes this. We're off to an excellent start. Ladies and gentlemen, Ester Mayonnaise. The power couple behind the Ester Mayonnaise brand spoke to me at length over the summer about their goals. They're all about size-inclusive product and carrying out their particular vision. Size-inclusive for mayonnaise actually means what it says. There were a number of women in the audience wearing the brand, most of whom were closer to the typical runway model size of very, very tiny, and everyone looked great in the clothes, on and off the runway. Finding a universal sizing solution takes a great deal of technical knowledge and, according to the designers, a lot of trial and error. The easiest summary for their solution is that it comes down to the system of elastic piping and ruching that's built into most of their work. Like, okay, do you see this ensemble? The way that we get this wonderful lightweight float, that kind of bouncing effect in the fabric, that comes from the elastic piping and the ruching up here. And we can see that same piping technique used in a more technical way in this top. The piping serves as a visual calling card for Manes, it's kind of their aesthetic, but it also allows the top to accommodate any bust size and shape in a purposeful and streamlined way. Being that the Ester Manes designers are focused, thriving, and learning about their own techniques season over season, we don't expect a complete overhaul of their look every 6 months. This is a slow burn brand. And this season they proposed a series of looks that were meant to question the conventional beach body expectations that so many of us have. I'm really looking forward to my next interview with the Manes team so we can discuss the new technical discoveries that they've made while working. Rokh was one brand that I was unfamiliar with before this trip, and they turned out to be one of the most pleasant surprises of the entire week. It's only been 10 seconds, but you can probably already tell that Rokh is deep in the deconstruction genre, similar in tone to how John Galliano approaches that tradition at Margiela currently. It's easy when looking at clothes like this to miss the finer details that make them what they are, so we're gonna hone in here and unpack this a bit. As a starting point, a lot of this collection seems to come back to reimagining a trench coat, or at least the technical material that makes a trench coat so useful. Here the trench becomes a blazer, here it's a paper bag floor-length skirt, and here it's a wrap dress. Also, this very unusual trench coat has lines sewn into it from Shakespeare's poem titled Adonis and Venus. So it's not a play by Shakespeare, it's a what's called a minor epic poem. This poem, which was Shakespeare's first published poem, took a story that everyone at the time was deeply familiar with. The goddess of love, Venus, tempts a handsome guy, Adonis, into sex, and Adonis accidentally dies in the process. Okay, so that was the standard version. In Shakespeare's version, Venus, the most gorgeous being in existence, comes to Adonis and is like, "Great news for you, I'm down to fuck." And Adonis is like, "Oh, no thanks, I'm good." And then the whole story is her like trying to like convince him and him being like, "I said I'm good, geez." Shakespeare took a classic story and flips it on its head in a funny but engaging way. Rokh's new collection is titled The Irrational View, where they take classic garments, most notably the trench coat, and find ways to reimagine those garments. And either way, a deep cut Shakespeare reference will always have a home on this channel. A couple other little details that I absolutely love are as follows. We have a great use of uneven pleating here. We're kind of used to seeing this technique carried out in a pleats please Issey Miyake way, where all the pleats are tiny and evenly spaced, but it makes a huge impact here when the pleats aren't all uniform. This looks great. The other detail are these hook and eye attachments for the skirts. Most of the time, like modular details in clothing, they aim to be as seamless and unnoticeable as possible, but it's kind of cool because this detail sort of embraces its own chaos in a way that I really like. Honestly, this collection ruled. I'm going to be paying much closer attention to Rokh moving forward. Next up is Loewe, and I am so excited. Loewe Reese's are an absolute thrill for me because these clothes are always worth examining closer. A huge part of this collection is naturally occurring things that look like they've been designed intentionally. There's a few brilliant ways that this idea gets approached by Jonathan Anderson. Let's look more closely. Firstly, we have the Anthurium flower. Now, okay, picking a flower seems obvious here, but there's a lot because these are unique among flowers. Whenever I see an Anthurium, I have to remind myself that it's a naturally occurring object. Like, even when I see it planted in the ground, it always looks kind of plastic to me. Jonathan Anderson plays off of that assumption by rendering an Anthurium in enamel. There's no disputing with this dress that the point here is, bam, I am wearing a mega Anthurium. It's kind of hard to show it on film, but the recreation of this flower and this dress really did look shockingly similar to the way that these flowers look when they're in nature, right? So in this case, we've manufactured an object that in its natural form looks like it is a manufactured object already. So that's kind of fun. Another twist on this idea of naturally occurring object used for designed objects is these balloon shoes. Of course, balloons are designed objects in and of themselves, but really the design of balloons is like this. A fully inflated balloon. We don't give much thought to them as objects when balloons are just sitting with no helium in a big plastic bag. And I think that might be the point. Balloons in this state aren't so much a designed object as much as just a natural byproduct of selling balloons. No one thinks about this when they think of balloons. But it is a designer's job to find beauty in places that we've never thought about beauty existing. And the final result is just beautiful. These make me incredibly happy. And then contrasting with both of those approaches to, natural objects versus manufactured objects, we have kind of a brain puzzle with these IRL digital clothes. So here we have the digitally designed non-object as real life object. And that would kind of feel gimmicky if not for the fact that these looked great in person. Like when I first saw the runway footage of this and saw the pictures, I was like, oh, really? This is going to come down to what these actually look like when you're in the room with them, and they look fantastic. It still is like kind of playing a trick on you when you look at them. They're great. As always, Jonathan Anderson continues to crank out work that's playful and grounded in a great conceptual framework. The man has done it again. I love this guy. Mame Kurogouchi was another new brand to me that was a great surprise this season. Despite showing since 2018, this was my first time seeing their work. This season, the designer talked about the difficulty of innovating in a tightly rubriced form like fashion. Kurogouchi took inspiration from Japanese bamboo basket weavers who brought innovation to their own craft, like Izuka Rokansai. The theme is even carried out into the tights, which have the ghostly image of bamboo in them. What's most interesting to me, though, is Kurogouchi's emphasis on the Japanese concept of ma, which doesn't have a direct English translation, but here can just mean the empty space inside of something. Most fashion designers, rightly, have a fixative focus on the human body and how clothes interact with them. But Miss Kurogouchi chooses to focus instead on the objects themselves, the space they create inside, and the body, like each of those three things as separate elements. Kurogouchi's harmony between the clothing, the empty space inside it, and the wearer's body comes out best in the bamboo brocade on a few of the skirts. This is clearly meant to be a node of a bamboo shoot, but it's placed on the wearer's body right where the femur and tibia bones connect. I'm already excited for the next Mame Kurogouchi show. This was absolutely brilliant. All right, so we're walking up to Courrèges. I know very little about how this brand operates in the modern era, but originally this is the designer that inspired Martin Margiela as a small boy to start working as a fashion designer someday when he was an adult. He is also known for popularizing the miniskirt, but mostly the Margiela thing, right? It's a brand with a lot of history and mythos behind it, so I'm really excited to kind of see what they're doing with it now. Let's find out. Courrèges ended up having the best set we saw all week, which was a circular runway completely covered in sand. The show started out with models walking with a bit of sand falling from the ceiling like an hourglass. As the mound of sand in the center grew bigger and heavier, the floor eventually gave way and collapsed in the center like an hourglass feeding into another hourglass beneath it. The soundtrack reflected this theme also, with a vocal sample repeating over and over again saying, "We start again, we start again, we start again." Fashion designers have long been focused on this idea of rebirth, mostly because of the pace of the industry. When you have to complete a collection and a runway show every 6 months, it can feel like a relentless cycle of birth and rebirth. Restarting the cycle eventually starts to feel like just taking another breath. This theme goes all the way down, too, as Courrèges' current goal isn't just to make statement items or anything pertaining to a trend. Their goal right now is to just make clothes for living your life in. Junya Watanabe is making his return to Paris this season, like many of his Japanese contemporaries. He loves playing off of themes that tie the collections to music, and this season we saw him diving deep on the 1980s with everything from the hair to the huge shoulders, to the capes but not capes, to the song that started the show, Girls on Film by Duran Duran. Junya's methods of playing with references is wildly different than most other designers. He likes to have a very specific place of reference, and then he leans into the most well-known visual tropes from that reference. For most designers, this dependence on, quote, obvious references would be detrimental because it would be too easy. But in the hands of Junya, it works. As a designer, he's so mischievous that these obvious visual tropes are still recognizable, but they've been completely transformed. And this here is a little bit anecdotal, but we also see a little fun detail that always makes me very happy. The inclusion of the fabric selvage in the final garment. So when you buy a full bolt of fabric, on the very end of the bolt there is what's called a selvage to prevent it from unraveling. That's also the area where the manufacturer will put in the name of the textile, their company name, the country of origin, and little notes about the fabric. Clothes that include the selvage always feel like the designer is bringing the audience in closer to their process. This was my first show with Junya, and I'm looking forward to many more. Next up, we had to rush across town for a really unconventional show at the 3537 building, Anrealage. This is yet another brand that I was very unfamiliar with, so my curiosity was at an all-time high here. So the show starts with some instantly noticeable, colorful garments made of patchwork. In fact, the whole collection was patchwork. The thing about this patchwork specifically is that it's all made from scraps of previous Anrealage collections, all overlock stitched together meticulously. I cannot imagine how long this would have taken to make. Patchwork is such a great challenge because it could answer a really big question about how leftover scraps can be reused in the fashion industry. And patchwork can look very different across the work of other designers that have adopted that technique, like Junya Watanabe, Olivier Tayskins, Capital, or even Ralph Lauren. Yet Anrealage's design language for monochromatic patchwork seems to try and express the depth of a Louise Nevelson work in the fabric by articulating the diverse nature of the way that the color black expresses itself in different fabrics and tones of black. If that's not a big enough challenge, after the monochromatic looks are finished, the first set of looks are brought back out onto the runway and are shown flipped inside out. When designers are finishing collections, it's usually a mad dash to the end, so this is such a flex. The clothes were finished so well for the purposes of a runway, but they're also finished so beautifully on the inside that the clothes can be presented that way as well. Adding to that effect were the headphones on each of the seats in collaboration with a company called NTT Sonority, a Japanese audio company. They didn't go directly into your ears, allowing some of the sound in the room to be heard through the speakers, but also some of it to be fed much closer to you through the headphones, creating kind of this three-dimensionality with the audio that complements the themes expressed in the clothes really well. Okay, we're now walking to Autolinger. This was on my list for brands to watch in 2021, and here they are at Paris Fashion Week. That's kind of cool. The seating assignments for this are super interesting. I have been assigned to mattress B5, so I guess we'll figure out what that means. Yeah, let's go see what it looks like. Autolinger has recently switched to doing pre-collections. The designers said that this move allows them to show the commercial work then, and then keep these main shows more open to experimentation. Their show notes tie into the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, which warns us to never look back. Top sellers and easy to merchandise products are often how fashion designers are forced to look back. So with their newfound freedom, let's see how they're pressing forward. One of Autolinger's best known motifs is trompe-l'oeil, and it's usually to give the viewer a heightened sense of chaos in the clothes. This season, the use of trompe-l'oeil was just as chaotic, but it was as if the clothes were the result of an explosion in an atelier. Pieces of jeans, jackets, and dresses flying together thousands of times until finally the pieces came together in just such a way that they fit onto a body, and it works. Lots of brands try for this touch of chaos look, but Autolinger is one of the few to get it really right. We also see undergarments snaking their way into the forefront of different looks. Typically, a bra or a pair of panties serves a very specific purpose in an outfit. And if these items are aesthetic, it's usually in an erotic way, right? So here it feels like the bra is searching for a new role in the outfit, snaking its way out into new areas of the body and even experiencing movement in the form of a long hanging cord. There's some fun symbolism to play with there for sure, but this show also adds a new element to the aesthetic that so many women want now, which is just a bodysuit. Autolinger is proposing to their audience this idea of adding in extra cords that can be styled and placed around the clothes on top of a bodysuit. I'm glad Autolinger made the switch to doing pre-collections. I'm excited to see what other experimentation they do with this moving forward. Mitsuru Nishizaka has been running the brand Ujo for 13 years. He learned his skills of pattern cutting by working for Yohji Yamamoto for 7. And there's a point in some artists' work where they feel the need to bring bring the viewer in closer, help them to not just see the work, but become part of its creation. That gives the viewer something like ownership over the final product, when they feel like they can see the creation process in the created thing itself. Dating back to Rei Kawakubo and later with Martin Margiela, there's been dozens of ways that this goal gets carried out with fashion designers. Mitsuro's strategy comes, oddly enough, through accessories designed by Shota Mino. We see some simple hands as clips and brooches here. When thinking about his own work as a pattern cutter, Mitsuro concluded that that's what his eyes end up resting on the most, his own hands. In the wider collection, we see the distinct touch of Japanese design, which is ensembles of clothing that each fight against conventional tailoring. Asymmetrical skirts, kimono-styled blazers, other blazers with open panels, and countless extended zipper pulls, loose ribbons, drawstrings, and small self-belts that gave each look a wistful, shivering movement. We've seen a lot of this genre of clothing from Japanese designers this Paris Fashion Week, but I want to be clear, as someone who spends most of his waking hours looking at clothes, I do not get tired of this aesthetic when it's done well. The busyness and unconventional shapes always warrant a second, third, and fourth look. Ujo crushed it this season. I can't wait to see how these looks turn into products in the coming months. Boyarovskaya, did I get it close? How do you say it?
Good.
Yes.
Oh, I did? Okay. Well, there we go. Can you both please introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Maria, fashion designer of Boyarovskaya.
Artem, co-founder of Boyarovskaya and photographer.
Do you create the prototypes in-house, or do you have a prototype?
In-house.
In-house?
Yes, the biggest part. Like, for example, the trench that model is wearing, it's transformable and it's very technical and conceptual. It needs to be made in-house.
So this is the second interview with you all, and I remember the first time we had this incredible story about a volcano erupting in Italy and destroying a town. Give us an overview of what this collection is kind of covering.
We met a guy who is a producer of the only one of tamburo. It's a drum musical instrument.
Sicilian drum. He's the only one who's making them, using the same techniques as he used to do it like 200 years ago. And there is a lot of like waste of the skins because he cannot use the skins that has like minor defects like hole or something.
Is that where the transparent part of,
exactly,
the trench coat comes from? That was really beautiful. That's a leather?
Yes.
But it's transparent.
It's a papyrus transparent leather that's used for this drum instrument.
We're adding in some very advanced stuff. The skins is a really excellent touch. It's very beautiful stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, please.
Okay, that's everything. Love you, mean it, bye.